for those 20 years, which is an amazing, I think, an amazing feat for a group of women. We're here today to talk about liminal space, the challenges, the gifts, the hurts, the problems, the concerns, and what it means to us and how we might best use it for the future, not only for ourselves individually, but for our families, for our communities, and ultimately the globe. This is a very special time in so many ways. Not only are we on the solstice, which is a very special day, we're also on the day of a very big planetary shift. So for all the things that are happening in nature, in humankind, because of the pandemic and because of just other forces of nature, we come together on this very important day to talk to each other, to think about the future. And to start us off, Jean has a magical bell, not really magical, it actually has a sound that unites us on a physical level. So close your eyes for a moment, if you would, and just listen to this wonderful sound and notice where in your body you're feeling it. Jean introduced me to the word liminal many years ago. I had never heard it before. I now understand it in a deep way because I'm experiencing it, but I understand it to be a threshold, a space between where we were, space between where we're going. And right now we live in that threshold space. So Jean, I'm going to ask you please to just introduce us to your understanding of liminal, and then we will carry on from there.
I think about liminal, and before I go into that, I think we were all just linked by the sound of this Tibetan bowl at the heart level, because the place that it most resonates with is the heart chakra. And so we are in an international, vast circle connected at the heart level. And it feels always good to be with you all at this heart level. Liminal is a word that so applies to where we are now, because the entire planet is in between what was before the pandemic and what will be when we are through this time, which probably will be sometime next year, maybe by summer, maybe not. And people all over the world are in between what was and what will be. And for the first time in the United States, there is an awareness of global warming coming up in this liminal time. It's been ignored. And so we have a time in between to make major changes that could affect the fate of humanity and the planet. Now, I'm a Jungian analyst and a psychiatrist. I see people in their own personal liminal times. Every single one of us has had multiple liminal experiences. When something ended, we were fine, and then, oops, disaster, oops, somebody leaves us. We're perfectly fine. We go get a test, and the test comes back with a serious potential about it, or a relationship shifts, or someone dies. Every important experience we've had ends and begins in this liminal space. People come to see a therapist when they are in between and don't know what next. So here we all are, sharing for the first time a planetary liminal experience. And it comes from the Latin word for threshold. And the thresholds can last for a long time, or they can just cross over and you go from being who you used to be. Say you get married, you were the maiden or whoever you were, and the next time you get married and you are now a married woman. Or you were a kid who started menstruating, and now you are where you are menstruating every month, like women all over the world who are in this phase of their lives. Every single physical, psychological, spiritual passage is liminal. And here on the winter solstice, it's one of the most profound planet and human experiences that go back prior to all of the religions that we are familiar with now. This is when we go into the dark. We've been going into the dark of winter. And this is the day when, at some level, humans have known that the light is slowly returning. So that's my introduction to this wonderful sense of liminal, where threshold, where change happens.
Katherine, what would you add to that?
Just, we had a part one of this conversation, and we talked a lot about birth in that first conversation. And really what we're talking about in this liminal solstice time is that pause that happens in the physical world that we all experience. And it's different, of course, northern and southern hemisphere. But it is that moment you're in the heart of the darkness, and then there's this shift. Someone sent me a live feed of the light at Newgrange in Ireland. Extraordinary video, and I think you can find it online. And you're in the pitch black, and then suddenly there's this breakthrough of this shaft of light that then infills the whole chamber and then moves on its march. And as you said, Jane, this is ancient in our world, this recognition. And I think what I would love us to explore a little bit is, what does that symbolize within ourselves when we are in the dark of an experience? And what is that breakthrough of light into our own being, our own bodies, our own hearts, our own psyches, our soul? And it seems very important to understand that it's okay and necessary to rest in the in-between, to not try to push back or forward, but just simply pause. It's really the heart of the liminal threshold, or the part of the liminal experiences that tilts us over the threshold into the light. And nature teaches us this. Our world teaches, the earth, the sun, the planets teach us this. And yet we sometimes don't make that connection from the outer world to also that we are connected within ourselves to that. So this threshold time individually, because people, even though they weren't ready to go into a crisis or a threshold experience, a liminal experience, we've been thrust into it, as you've said, collectively. And what is that light that's breaking through into humanity's consciousness now? If we look at the human spirit as being one being, we are undergoing something as a collective that we have not been through before. So that's where I sort of would love to start, and just encourage people to view that first conversation, which is available on Woman's Perspective homepage. the first part of our conversation. But this conversation continues that exploration. And here we are in this remarkable solstice moment, as you were saying, Jean.
And for me at the moment, what I'm struck by is that not only is the entire world going through the same thing, but that because of technology, we are able to speak with people all over the globe at the same time. And the fact that this is being streamed on Facebook means that many people will see this who we don't even know. So the possibility of saying something inspirational to people you have never met, may never meet, seems to me an extraordinary opportunity. Just an extraordinary opportunity that we would never have had without this pandemic. I will defer to you two wonderful women to carry on the liminal.
Well, the title was Reflections on the Gifts of Liminal Time. And so we know through all of our contacts with our friends, with our families, we just look at the news, we go down and see the lines around our food banks. We know that this is a time of incredible challenge, and for many, a crisis point as they look at how they're going to get through this next time period. So that is all going on. We're losing people that we know. We are also have been losing parts of our Earth community, species extinction for the past, I don't know how many decades. So we're having a lot that we're having to face about what is dying in our world and dying in our own sense of the world. And that is part of that liminal experiences where we come to terms, we face this. And the paradox is that also there is so much that is being born. And that again strikes this moment in our solstice period, in our Christmas period, of looking at what is birthing within ourselves and what do we see birthing within our environment, within our friends. You've mentioned one thing that's new, is this ability to connect through this technology and learning, as some of you who came on early, learning how to work the technology so that we really can have that heart connection with one another that Jean invoked at the beginning of our time together. So yeah, we're in the paradox moment of this pause time. And just one other thing, Jean, and then I'll get your take on it. Because I mentioned Newgrange and I hadn't expected that, I think of the Celtic world, and a lot of my background has been both at Findhorn, the Findhorn Foundation and Findhorn community, where I was for a number of years in the early 70s, but also to the Isle of Iona off the west coast of Scotland, where I have led retreats for some 30 plus years. And what I've learned from the Celtic world and the Celtic teaching, both pre-Christian and post-Christian, is that there was an honoring of this pause time. So we think of Halloween as being an event in a moment. Well, really, it was a 3-day period that the Celts considered was the in-between time, where the old year was no longer, and the new year hadn't yet begun. And in different traditions of the Celtic or different periods of history, I mean, they ritualize that pause. And I'd like us to talk more about what can happen. What is the potency of this pause time? Other cultures honor this as well. It's not like, oh, we go from here to here. there's a process, there's an organic process that is so important for us to understand. And I feel it will help inform us as we embrace and learn how to hold the collective passage we're in. Any thoughts on that, Jean?
Well, I'm also reminded of being in Ireland at the winter solstice at a place older than Newgrange, up at Schléile na Holly, which is a older ruins. When I went up there on a pilgrimage with maybe 20 women during a period of my life when I was leading pilgrimages, and find that women went on pilgrimages during times in their lives when wondering what next was a question. And to go up to Schléile na Holly and be there on the solstice, driving up in a bus in the fog, wondering, will dawn come? We go up there and we are there when that beam of light came in to a very small cairn-like place, and inside it did illuminate. And it's nature that I think many of us first had the experience of the mystical sense of the universe, of sleeping out under the stars if you were a Girl Scout or a Girl Guide or something, and you saw the vast universe and were open to the mystical connection between your small heart self person and this magnificent universe. And so this is a spiritual experience. A liminal time is an opening when the spirit can become stirred by one where you kind of are in between, you're out of your usual life. Something has changed, and that means you're receptive. That means that, like for all of us that are able to be sheltered in place and work from home and things like that, we sleep in longer than we used to. It means that you have time to remember your dreams when you wake up and write them down. And maybe that is what you spend time with during the day, the meaning of your own dreams, a connection with the people in them. And what sometimes happens is you start to hear and remember people on the other side. I mean, that's one of the Celtic kinds of experiences, is a sense of the mystical world and the invisible world, as well as the visible one. And the spirits of those you've loved who are on the other side that you connect with. So this is a time when in the United States, I think it's about 350,000 people have died of coronavirus. It means that so many of those people died without seeing and being with the people that are on this side. I'm thinking that for many of you who have lost people, that you might be receptive to finding that there's an effort to reach you through your dreams, or you'll have a sense of presence. And one of the things that's very important is to know that in general, the sense is you have to be receptive. The other side does not intrude upon us particularly, but if we will only make space to be connected with those we've loved who are on the other side, you may very well, through dreams, through a sense of presence, through a sense of hearing a voice, through having a sense of a person being with you. And I'm suggesting that isn't that it isn't that there's something wrong with your mind. I mean, after all, I'm a psychiatrist and a Jungian analyst, and I know that people get very disturbed in some ways, and they hear voices that persecute them or prosecute them, but this is very different. When you hear the voice of someone on the other side, and there's this connection, and you have a dream, and in the dream, you know the person has died, but there they are, and they're talking to you in the dream over and over again. I've heard dreams like that. And I'm just suggesting that to anyone who has lost someone, to be receptive to the efforts to communicate back to you, because it happens. Yeah. And then, or as you grow older, as I have grown older over the years, I'm older than a lot of people who've passed. And so then there's a sense of being connected with them, of having a circle on the other side as well as one on this side. And this is part of receptivity that this particular liminal experience of time and space provides us. So I thought I would put that in.
Beautiful.
Oh, and it reminds me of one of the books that I've written. And the only one that I have revised had to do with when my son died after a time at home when he had been paralyzed. He woke me up before he took his last breath with the voice that he didn't have anymore, but that I heard clearly. So I went to his bedside. I expected his eyes would be open because he would wake me up during the night with a loud whisper. But there he was. He took his eyes were closed. He took his last breath as I turned up the light, and then he was gone. And shortly after that time, he started appearing in people's dreams. He was felt as a presence. And when the Million Circle came for a reunion, you, Katherine, had a dream in which Andy showed up. So this world in between is something that I would imagine there was so many people dying of coronavirus who had not warned people that they were going to suddenly get it and be in quarantine and then they're gone. I would bet that all kinds of experiences are happening with people who are on this side, hearing from those who died of the coronavirus.
And also, Jean, having experiences of those who are in the dying process. I'd like to just share, I think what we're talking about is really important because it has to do with widening our sense of identity, of who we are, of how we come into a more whole way of functioning. And that does embrace the subtle worlds. It embraces the invisible and embraces parts of ourselves that have always been known and experienced, but have been marginalized, trivialized, have been, you're crazy if you think someone's spoken from the other side. But anyway, the experience I want to share is one that my husband had. We're here in Santa Barbara, California. His mom and dad in their 90s lived in Southern England. Mary in May fell down and broke her hip, had to go to the hospital in the middle of COVID time. No one of the family there was allowed to go be with her, and we were not able to fly due to restrictions. So there Mary was in the hospital, and this tremendous sense of, she might check out, she might not, we don't know, but we can't even talk to her because she had needed hearing aids, she had her dentures that weren't there, and we could not very seldom get through on the phone. So Roger said, I need to do something. What do I do? I mean, it's my mother, I love her. We all loved her so much, love her. And he started a practice of just going into the quiet and moving into a form of meditation and imagining that he was by her bedside, standing and putting one hand on her heart to let her know how much he loved her and another hand on her head just to find peace and calm in the midst of whatever was right for her, that it would come. And finally, Roger's brother, about a few days after this practice had started with Roger, she was able to talk to Roger's brother and share with him, you know, Roger is standing at my side and he has his hand, one hand on my heart and the other on my forehead. And I am so at peace and so happy. And this continued, and it was a verification to us, something we always know, but somehow we have to keep getting reminded, don't we? That we are connected through the heart. We are connected through presence, the presence of love, in ways that our Western mind has just sort of put the blinders on and says doesn't exist. So I am hoping in this COVID period, in this liminal time, that people allow themselves to pay attention, as you were saying, but also look at the restrictions that have been placed on ourselves of where we diminish our inner knowing. And of course, going back to the Findhorn community, that's what it was based on, was listening to that presence of spirit, and then being inspired and acting on it, and acting in love. Whatever you do, whoever you're with, love who you're with, love what you're doing, love just everything around you. And then the intelligence inherent within all of life, the presence, the abiding, ensouled presence that is in every life form. Connect to that through love. And so I'm hoping, I'm of course very biased, but as I listen to people who are going through these experiences of hearing the birds that they've never heard before, of walking in wherever they can walk, there's a way in which connections are being made, both to nature, but it's to this enlivening, subtle presence that is part of our world. And that awakens our love. And that, I think, is what we need at this time, is this profound awakening of love, so that then we care for what we love, care for those others, care for our soil, our air, our earth. Anyway.
You know, before there was all this internet and technology business, people did develop more of their connections with each other in ways that we humans are able to cross over from time and space. And in my family history, I had a grandfather who had been born in Japan and whose relatives were still there. And he came to America to go to medical school and college. And then the Depression came along and he stayed here and grew a pretty good sized family. And my mother remembers when he would come down he would come downstairs for breakfast from time to time. When people were dying that he was friends with in Japan, and he would say, oh, so-and-so came to me in a dream with a suitcase. He left. And then the cable would come informing them weeks later, or however long it took for a cable to get from Japan to New York City, that so-and-so, the one who showed up in a dream, had died. But he knew it because of the connection. And I'm wondering, in this time of pandemic and in lots of places, I wonder if people are feeling themselves more deeply connected. I hope they are. I don't think we can count on all this technology as much somehow.
As we discovered, it could go the moment the electricity goes. But yes, I think it's both the experience of being disconnected, right? That so many are feeling in their isolation, in their being trapped. And then discovering connection. And that is one of the things that with the people I work with, it is really to begin, even if it is with their house or their abode where they're living, to begin to form a connection with place, the places that we are, and to find those things that we treasure and love. And in that, there is this enlivening of the connection with, call it the intelligence of our environment, the intelligence of our computer, of our kitchen, the spirit of our kitchen, of just the ground upon which we stand. And in that recognition, in forming a connection, there is something that occurs that is almost, used to say at Findhorn in the early days, it was as if the vibrations themselves shifted within when we have that co-creative relationship, that co-loving partnership. Anytime we engage that, which we learn about in Circle, right? How to move into that reciprocity of flow that happens when we connect to what is within. And if many people don't think there's a withinness within their environments, but there is. It's our whole world is alive with life that we can connect to. And I have found people who have been at one point very disconnected and in depression, beginning to practice this. Just find one thing in the environment. All of a sudden, this sense of being isolated and alone has shifted into, oh my gosh, I am not alone, even though I'm stuck in my apartment here for, what is it, 10 months now, 9 months, and maybe longer, much longer. So how do we engage this more subtle, invisible, and yet ever-present part of our world and part of ourselves into a connection that is transformative? So thinking of your grandfather and that, you know,
I have a
he
very
was aware.
interesting experience with a bird that I wanted to photograph. Every morning I take a walk on the beach, and there was this extraordinary bird I wanted to photograph. And every morning I went out with my camera. And when I would leave, I would say to him, I'll be back tomorrow morning. I really want to see you in flight. And the next morning I'd go and he'd be there. And someone finally said to me, do you suppose that bird is waiting for you as much as you are going to see him? Never occurred to me, but he was there every morning. She was there every morning. And I finally did get a picture in flight.
Beautiful.
Connection
It just,
different for all of us, but they are very real.
well, it's just a reminder. I was part of organizing a program with 3 women who worked with dolphins, elephants, and bears, the big animals. And it was called Wild Wisdom. It was a fabulous program. But each of them shared that it was through the animal kingdom and connecting to the kingdom that they finally discovered compassion. And the whole premise of the program was that as we engage with nature, we are engaging with a fuller part of ourselves, and that everything in nature enlivens an aspect that we have not discovered, and qualities of our spirit, qualities of our capacity into greater wholeness. And so again, coming back to nature, Jean, you know, we are discovering what it is to walk the path into greater wholeness. But we can't do that alone. Can't do that alone from one another or from our brothers and sisters. And maybe we're realizing we can't do it without engaging in all of the community of life, that each has a quality and an aspect to teach us and awaken us into our fullness. So just
Katherine, one of the things that you speak of, but without using the word for it, is gratitude. The connection of being out in nature and realizing that each tree, for example, has its own shape and connection, and the soulfulness of nature and the expansion of our own souls in nature makes us feel one with nature, with the universe, with a sense of, the whole idea we are spiritual beings on a human path rather than human beings who may or may not be on a spiritual path. That we are essentially spiritual beings on a human path that have come through the body of our biological mothers into the world when we had lungs that were able to take our first breath, and then we're totally dependent on the people around us to get us through this infancy period. We are connected to Mother Earth in the same way that we as a fetus were connected to our biological mother when we were inside the uterus. Once we come out through the passageway, under the pubic bone, into the world and take our first breath, we start breathing, as humans do, the atmosphere. And what I've been doing with my appreciation of trees and the writing of a book called Like a Tree in 2011, before its time, and realizing that as people cut down trees, more and more people are born in this world and less trees exist, that it's the trees that are the placenta for our atmosphere. The trees take in our carbon dioxide and breathe out the oxygen we breathe. And if we destroy our forests and the life on our planet, then we've destroyed what is keeping us alive. And the kind of sense of being dependent when we were inside the uterus of our mothers, and then we go out into the world and we are dependent again, first on other human beings, and then on this planet's ability to have clean air. I mean, we are all part of the same family of that nature has brought us all into. There's a mystical side to being out in nature, and that mystical side informs us that we matter. And in this pandemic time, when many are by themselves, there is the sense of connection with others, for example, through Zoom. There's a reaching out, some ability for us to reach out more than we knew we could before. I'm doing my practice virtually on FaceTime, for example. I find there's more interaction at some level than there was in my office. It's different, but there are these connections, the circles that meet, the families that used to meet only maybe once or twice a year. Now, many are meeting together once a week, though they live in various different parts of the country even. But they are more real to each other than they used to be. This is in this liminal time, changes are happening, some of which we can observe, results of which we don't know yet. But this is the gift part. Certainly we know the painful parts of it, but I'm really glad, Rosemary, that you brought up the gift of liminal time, because it is a gift of time and space in which to allow connections to grow inside of us. And it's a rather amazing time, and we're not through it yet. So we have more time to connect and to grow and to, from inside out, know what we came to do here. I mean, I think that's the idea of individuation, which is a Jungian term, is I translate into meaning to become who you were meant to be. And it has to do with who you came to love, what you came to do, what are you here for, really? this in liminal time is when we can really get a sense of, oh, this is who I am. This is what I came to do.
So, such a beautiful introduction, Jean, to the fact that we are going to break out into small groups. So we are magnifying the idea of circle connections. We're magnifying the idea of being able to be who we are in the present moment to those we're with. And we have chosen a quote by Maya Angelou to focus on in those small groups. And the quote will be posted in the chat. It will also be broadcasted in the small group. The quote is, "We are all at once, both a composition and a composer. We have the ability not only to compose the future of our own lives, but to help compose the future of everyone around us and the communities in which we live." So with that, Amy Lenzo will help us to break out into small groups, and you will say what you will to each other about what you think about that quote. And Jean and Katherine and I will do the same thing until Amy calls us back. Thank you, Amy. So here we are in our small group.
Okay.
And
And
those on
hopefully,
Facebook will be listening to our conversation on Facebook.
and
Yeah.
hopefully each will have, I believe there's 10 minutes each person so that we can try 3 groups of 3. So they'll have about 3 minutes to share. So yes, Jean, you had a thought about this quote. We're once both a composition and a composer.
Well, I had, it was all, I felt it was too positive.
Too positive. It has its shadow side. So,
Yeah, so I mean, there's truth to it, but people grow. I don't know. I'm seeing how much life is difficult for a lot of people, and how you deal with it is what you really truly have. How we react to what happens, good and bad, is up to us individually, and not everybody handles it well at all. And that's what I was responding to, as being too positive a comment. But
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's very, very tricky to be in a group, and because I've just had this experience where certain basic norms or things that I think of as norms are not being honored. You know, and if a group doesn't have, you know, some basic skills in how to deal with, you know, at least one person who's got some deep wounds, it does threaten to take the entire group mission off purpose.
That's true. And oftentimes there are people in that group who can bring the focus back and help with the healing. I'm unclear on how many people are in our group at the moment. Elizabeth?
I see 8. I see 8. If you go to the gallery view up at the top, you can see everyone who's joined.
I'm going to go to gallery, and I see Vera there.
We have about,
I'm looking at that, but something, again, a technological glitch has arrived.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the groups were supposed to be 3 so that everyone would get an opportunity to say something.
But perhaps we could listen. Can you speak, Vera?
Yeah, I was in a room with Pat, who was in 2 rooms, and I was suggested to be reallocated to a new group.
Well, welcome.
But here you are.
And
And
so I just want to make something clear that the people in this group are being live streamed on Facebook. So if there is something that you don't want the world at large to hear you say, I would suggest you monitor whatever it is that you say.
So you're not reallocating me.
So
No?
just
I
to
don't
be,
know. I am not in charge of that. And
so
I
just
am,
to be clear, you don't want me to put Vera in in another room. You want to bring her in here? Is that what you're saying?
no, we were the public.
Okay,
We were the public face, Amy. We thought everyone else was somewhere else.
and
But
they are,
anyway.
except for Vera who dropped out. So
No, there
I'll deal with Vera. It's okay.
I was
Well-
the only one in the room,
there were 9 of
in
us.
the breakout room.
and it's okay to be with us in this conversation,
Yeah.
Vera. Vera is in Scotland. So,
Just welcome you just to know that you are on Facebook as well.
Okay, thank you.
okay.
I found that quote a couple of weeks ago, and I just thought it was so beautiful. I do understand that it's possible to go awry and doesn't work all the time. But so much of what we do in our lives, whether we know it or not, affects someone else. So it struck me that being both a composition and a composer was an important thing to give some consideration to. Because even when we're not aware of someone watching us or listening to us, we are affecting the community as a whole in some way.
Both a composition from our life experience,
Right.
all the influences that have shaped us from all the different fields of relationship that we're a part of, family and parents and early schooling and socialization and our work and all of these things that we navigate, coming back to that shaft of our own light. We are always in a co-relationship with what we meet, and it is the journey of making meaning and of growing through these experiences and of forging ways in which we can bring ourselves into the world, and from that authentic place, from that deeper place. So there's a composition both from outside, but also this force from within, our deeper potential, from within what has not yet been expressed as, going back to what you were saying, our gift. And I think, again, coming back to the COVID moment, we are in a time where we are meeting all of the influences that have shaped us from our world, but we are also have the opportunity to discover that composer within, the great composer, the spirit composer, who is, yeah. And that is a force when it is embodied in our lives and in our actions, is a force that does influence in a generative way, in a creative way, in forming relation connections, as we spoke about before. So
I'm
that's,
struck
Yeah.
by the simple thing of my sitting here in my apartment by myself saying, oh, we should have a Zoom conversation about liminal space. And then we have it. So I'm thinking that there are many other people sitting in their home thinking, oh, this might happen, or I should do this. And then there's a whole new effect of some new thought taking life in a place that had been barren of that kind of activity. So I'm thinking this is happening in many spaces and just encouraging it to see where we go. We know we're in a time of restructuring. We know that all the structures we have in society are kind of in a bit of a quandary right now. They're not behaving well. They're not functioning well. So we need a lot of creativity to come in and change some of those things. So that's why I thought that was an interesting quote, from inside to outside to community.
One of the things that I'm noticing, because one of the areas that I've been active in is as an environmental activist, but I've noticed within the social justice, environmental justice, economic justice, racial justice circles, that there's an increased commitment to self-care, and actually proclaiming that even in the newsletters that have to do with all of the external justice activities that they're trying to promulgate in the world. And I think that's an encouraging thing. And but it's also a tricky thing to negotiate, because quite often the people who are involved in those movements are suffering from PTSD. So the amount of issues that people who are learning to self-care at the same time they're trying to change the world, it becomes incredibly tangled sometimes, I think,
Elizabeth,
trying to do that well.
I'm thinking the necessity is to bring in a spiritual dimension without it being a religious one, because a group of exhausted people or people that are in whatever state they're in, you can't expect each of them to generate enough energy for everybody else in the group. The group comes together, and love does exist in the group if they're connected at the heart level. But I think it's also very significant to be in silence for part of the time, to where there's a sense of calling on the larger, what Jungians would call the archetype of the larger self, but which other people call God or goddess or all that is or powers that is or whatever. And whatever it is, that however you call, and have a sense of something greater than yourself that is divine and spiritual, however you feel it. When you go into silence and everybody in that group is moving into their own connection with that silent sense of divinity, it's like there's an energy pool that is created, that every time you meet, you drop into that space and you're nurtured by it. Because one of the things I know about love is it's the only energy there is, that the more you give away, the more there is, the more you have and the more the other people have. And so that divinity in the center of the circle, which is why I wrote the Million Circle and put in the spiritual center of it, and not just the idea of being a consciousness raising group or a activist group or a particular group that's mobilizing something, but that whatever the group is doing, if they will only also connect with the spiritual center in themselves and generated within the group, you've got much more energy to take with you out into the world to do your environmental thing or your whatever you're doing.
Jean, the entire group has come back together. So
Mhm.
welcome everyone back from your breakout rooms. I would ask you, please, Jean, to amplify what you were saying, but begin at the beginning with an explanation of the Million Circle and what it is you mean by a circle with a spiritual center. Jean wrote a wonderful book for those of you who are unaware of it called The Million Circle.
How to Change Ourselves and the World is the subtitle. And it was a seed book that began the organization, the conveners of the Million Circle, which I didn't form, but I wrote like it was a seed packet. It was an idea that went out, and it grew circles with a spiritual center. And however you define spiritual center, drop into it, connect with each other, and it generates more, because essentially it generates a sense of a loving connection with each other and with powers greater than ourselves. Simple enough. Simple enough just to expect that you also, within your personal circle, like I also have a personal circle of 6 of us, and we check in. But just before we go into silence, and only for 5 or 10 minutes, we put in the name of people that we want prayers for, or whatever. And it feels as if this circle that has been meeting for years now, with a sense of connecting to each other with their worlds and sending prayers out and getting feedback, that it has made a difference. So I just wanted to put that one in, that add that dimension.
Yeah. And in a sense, Jean, it has to do with discovering in whatever ways can that larger container or that larger support system that can hold us, the holding field. Because that's what often people who experience sacred circle, there is something that is bigger than all the parts, members. There am I. There she is. Some people have that experience. They don't know how to create that experience. And that's part of one of the key things that I recommend at this point, is that we each find a way to create a holy container ourselves to liminal time.
And we can do it online.
Quality of support and love. And I just use the technique of the hand, the presence of the hand, the loving touch, and feeling that on my own body, wherever I might do it. And then imagined a hand behind me, supporting my whole back. Sometimes you have those images of Buddha's hand, the big hand, just almost from the base of the spine up, and just feeling oneself held. And there's different techniques depending on what you hold as sacred, and to hold you. But there is an energetic container that gets needed that helps the energy you're feeling of building this space to allow the deeper vision, the deeper understanding, the deeper insight, the deeper knowing to break through. That is very powerful, and it works. I've seen it work with hundreds of people who don't have a support group. Actually can begin to call in and create that energy. And then they begin to recognize it. They begin to find people, situations, places that carry that quality. But holding contained and being held in the liminal time is part of the wisdom that helps us move through and give birth to ourselves, to our actions that are going to, as you said in the quote, wherever it is, that are going to heal and support the communities and the great. So,
Katherine, I don't know whether you noticed or not.
Rose. So Rosemary's frozen, and I'm sure how many others are frozen. I have a few faces there. Oh, there she's back.
Oh,
You froze there for a minute, Rosemary.
oh, so what I was saying was that when you said the words break through, the sun broke through. As you can see, half of my face is now lit up, and it just filled the room when you uttered those words. I'm going to ask you if you would to summarize perhaps what we've talked about today, and to say something about the workshop that you will offer in January for Women's Perspective. We hope to keep this theme going and encourage people to open up and go through the liminal space in a way that is constructive and creative.
Yeah, and then I'll hand it over to Eugene to summarize. Thought was that how do we create a with a group of people who want to explore and have a chance to share their own insights and breakthrough understanding and experiences. So we are doing a 3-part series in January, 2.5 hours, which will give lots of time for break discussion, a journaling process through the 3 weeks, for input, but we're going to just design it through the 3 stages. What is breaking down, what is no longer working as the first part, and what is the experience of that? How do we let go? Then the middle part of being in liminal space, what is that? How is that affecting our minds, our bodies, our psyches? And then the 3rd session will be on new is emerging, and what new do we see emerging in our world, and how do we identify how we're moving forward individually, and then supporting our greater collective and planting trees. Anyway, that's my final statement. I'm going to go plant a tree today. Jean, I know we don't have much time left, but yeah, you can sign for that. Rosemary will be sending a link for that deeper 3-part series. And it's been a joy being with you and seeing some very familiar names on this. And happy solstice.
Well, this is a liminal time indeed. And what happens in liminal time and space often doesn't appear to be making a difference, and then the world can actually shift. I remember when it was just women talking to each other in something called consciousness raising groups at the end of the 60s. And then by the beginning of the 70s, we had the era, the decade of the women's movement. And now watching television, seeing the doctors on the front line, the doctors and nurses, the mayor here and the governor there, and the vice president elect. And how did we get so many women in position of decision making? Well, it began with groups of women telling the truth of their own lives and supporting each other to make a difference in their lives, in their communities. It became the women's movement of the 70s. And then it got sort of smushed down, and women started to say, well, I'm not a feminist. But they continued on their own individuation path. And now there are more women in places of decision making and support and working hard and all that. Well, the men's circle, with the idea of taking women's circles with a spiritual center as a grassroots and dropping into a collective unconscious level where you add your circle to all the idea of circles, which make it easier and easier for circles to form. And it is. People use the word circle a lot more than they used to. Instead of group, they talk about circle, because circles are forming, and circles are the antidote to patriarchal power over. So every time we meet in a circle, consider that we're not only supporting ourselves and each other to become who we were meant to be, or to get through the cancer diagnosis, or to get through the loss, to experience collective connections with each other, but we're also part of the grassroots movement of seeding circles, in which at some point, without the problem of fighting over it, suddenly circle just becomes more what people do. And I think this is what is actually happening in this liminal time. Families in which there was a dominant parent now often meet on Zoom circles where even each kid gets to speak up. Something is potentially happening in this liminal time that is good. And if you haven't a circle of your own, consider that you can invite people that you were close to in college who now live all over the place. Who were your best friends way back when? Consider bringing together those with whom you've had a heart connection. And then you find yourself creating a circle that nourishes you to keep growing and to support the visible and the invisible realm. So we've ended up talking about liminal space in many, many different ways, but that's also what happens is a seed idea goes out and you never know where it lands. I call it the dandelion effect. You know, you blow out your dandelion, the seeds go out, and some of them drop into fertile soil and grow. Well, I think this is fertile soul, S-O-U-L, that we send out ideas and it lands somewhere. Yeah. And this is what we're doing in this in-between liminal time.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Jean, we're coming up to the end. Rosemary has disappeared.
Yeah.
There's some elves and mischief makers over solstice time. And I think we've had on this call and welcomed them. And just thank you on behalf of Women's Perspective. And a final thought for us all to take is, what is the spirit of this virus itself? What if its purpose, and it has a intelligence, and what is it saying? And so that's a lovely question and reflection for us to have. And not only is it doing, but is it itself something that we need to meet and understand and learn from? So I know on behalf of you, Rosemary, but you're here in the last minute. So glad.
My whole internet connection went down. So blessings that you're all still there. Thank you for everything, for keeping going.
Oh, wonderful.
I'd like to sound of the Tibetan bowl again.
Would be the perfect conclusion.
And then everybody feel the heart chakra, and maybe a spontaneous prayer or a spontaneous thought or a spontaneous envisioning will happen as you feel the vibration and your heart responds.
Well, I thank you, Jean. I thank you, Katherine. Thank everyone who came to listen today. Blessings on the solstice, on everyone and their families. And I don't know what happened to the connection, but since you're all still there, I treasure you. We'll do this again. Okay. I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you so much.